The interview room is sterile, white walls, fluorescent lights humming overhead. A child psychologist sits across from a 7-year-old boy named Michael. The date is March 15, 2019. The location is a research facility in Charlottesville, Virginia. The psychologist asks a standard question. Can you tell me about your earliest memory? Michael doesn't hesitate. The fire, he says. I remember the fire. The theater was full. Everyone was screaming. The doors wouldn't open. I couldn't breathe. And then, nothing. The psychologist writes this down, maintains professional composure, asks follow-up questions. What theater? Michael describes it in detail. Ornate ceiling, red velvet seats, a balcony section, specific architectural features. Where was it? Chicago, Michael says. The Iroquois Theater, December 30th, 1903. The psychologist stops writing. Michael is 7 years old. He was born in 2012. He's never been to Chicago. His parents confirmed he has no connection to theater history, no exposure to information about historical disasters, but he's describing, with disturbing accuracy, the Iroquois Theater fire, a tragedy that killed over 600 people, most of them women and children, in one of the deadliest single-building fires in American history. The psychologist asks one more question. Michael, why do you remember this? And Michael answers with words that will haunt the research team for years. Because I was there. We were all there. All of us remember. 3 children, 3 different states, 3 different families with no connection to each other, all born within the same 18-month period between 2011 and 2012, and all of them, beginning around age 4, started describing the same traumatic death, the same theater, the same fire, the same desperate final moments of a tragedy that occurred over a century before they were born. Their parents thought it was imagination at first. Children have vivid fantasies. They create elaborate stories. But these weren't stories. They were memories. Specific, verifiable, historically accurate memories of an event none of these children should have any knowledge of. When researchers began investigating, they discovered something that should be impossible. At least 17 children, scattered across North America, all born within a narrow window of time, all spontaneously recalling the Iroquois Theater fire as if they had experienced it firsthand. They described details that weren't in history books, details that could only be verified through archived newspaper accounts and survivor testimonies, details that suggested these children weren't imagining or fantasizing. They were remembering. And if they were remembering, then the question becomes unavoidable. Whose memories are these? The phenomenon of past life memories in children has been studied for decades, primarily by researchers like Dr. Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia. Stevenson documented thousands of cases worldwide where young children spontaneously recalled details of previous lives. Names, locations, relationships, causes of death. Most cases involve children who claim to remember dying and then being reborn, usually describing lives that ended violently or prematurely. Stevenson's work, while controversial, established protocols for investigation, verify the child's claims against historical records, ensure no prior exposure to the information, document physical evidence like birthmarks that correspond to wounds from the alleged previous life. His research suggested that approximately 1 in 500 children experience some form of past life recall, usually between ages 2 and 7, with memories fading as the child matures. But Stevenson's cases typically involved individual children remembering individual past lives. One child, one previous identity. What makes the Iroquois Theater case unprecedented is that multiple children, with no connection to each other, are remembering the same event, the same death, as if they all shared a collective experience in a previous existence, as if they all died together and somehow impossibly returned together. But what if this isn't about reincarnation at all? What if the truth behind these memories is far more disturbing than anyone realizes? What if these children aren't remembering their own past lives, but something else entirely? Something that suggests consciousness, memory, and identity work in ways we've never understood? What if the Iroquois Theater fire left behind something more than historical records and architectural ruins? What if trauma, when experienced by hundreds of people simultaneously, creates a kind of psychic residue, an imprint in reality itself that certain individuals, under certain conditions, can access? And what if these children aren't special or chosen, but simply vulnerable? Open channels receiving a broadcast from the past, carrying memories that were never meant to survive, experiencing deaths that should have stayed buried over a century ago. The investigation that follows isn't just about verifying whether reincarnation is real. It's about understanding what happens when trauma echoes across time, when the dead refuse to stay silent, and when children become vessels for horrors they should never have known. The Iroquois Theater opened in Chicago on November 23, 1903. It was billed as absolutely fireproof, a state-of-the-art venue designed to rival the greatest theaters in the world. The opening was delayed due to construction issues, but by December, the theater was hosting performances of Mr. Bluebeard, a popular musical comedy. On December 30th, a Wednesday afternoon, the theater was packed for a holiday matinee. Nearly 2,000 people, most of them women and children, enjoying a festive outing during the Christmas season. The theater was beautiful. Guests described ornate plasterwork, plush seating, elegant balconies. It felt safe. It felt magnificent. It felt like nothing could go wrong. But the theater's fireproof designation was largely marketing. The building lacked basic safety features: no sprinkler system, no fire alarm, no clearly marked exits, no functional ventilation, and critically, many exit doors opened inward or were locked to prevent people from sneaking in. The stage used open flame lighting, arc lamps that generated intense heat, and the scenery was painted with highly flammable materials. 20 minutes into the second act, at approximately 3:15 p.m., one of the arc lights sparked. A piece of fabric caught fire. The flames spread to the stage curtains. At first, performers tried to reassure the audience, telling them to remain calm. But within seconds, the fire was out of control. A stagehand attempted to lower the asbestos safety curtain designed to separate the stage from the auditorium, but the curtain snagged on a light fixture and stuck partway down, creating a gap through which flames and superheated air poured into the audience. Panic erupted immediately. 2,000 people tried to flee simultaneously through inadequate exits. The doors that opened inward became bottlenecks as crowds pressed against them from behind, making them impossible to open. Other doors were locked. Some exits led to fire escapes that were never completed. People opened doors expecting escape routes and found themselves facing sheer drops of 60 feet to the alley below. In the balcony sections, the crush was worst. Bodies piled 10 deep at exit doors. People suffocated before the fire reached them, crushed by the weight of others trying to escape. Children were trampled. Women trapped by their long skirts fell and were trampled over. The fire created a backdraft when stage doors were opened, sending a blast of flame through the auditorium that incinerated everything in its path. The entire disaster lasted less than 15 minutes. By 3:30 p.m., the fire was essentially over. Over 600 people were dead, with hundreds more injured. The official count was 602 fatalities, but the real number was likely higher. Many bodies were never identified, and some families may have been completely wiped out with no one left to report them missing. The dead were primarily women and children. The victims died from burning, smoke inhalation, trampling, and crushing. Many died within feet of exits they couldn't reach. Bodies were found stacked against doors, piled in stairwells, heaped in corridors. The alley behind the theater, which should have been an escape route, became known as Death Alley. It was filled with bodies of people who jumped or were pushed from incomplete fire escapes, falling to their deaths on the pavement below. The theater itself remained largely intact structurally. The fire had burned hot and fast but hadn't consumed the building. Within hours, the bodies were being removed. Within days, investigations began into what went wrong. And within weeks, Chicago wanted to forget. The theater reopened briefly under a new name, but audiences stayed away. Eventually, it was demolished. Today, an office building stands on the site, and most people have never heard of the Iroquois Theater fire, despite it being one of the deadliest disasters in American history. But the children remember. Michael, interviewed in 2019, was the first case that drew significant research attention. His descriptions were too specific to dismiss. He drew pictures of the theater interior that matched historical photographs his parents confirmed he'd never seen. He described the smell, not just smoke, but something specific, something chemical, that historians later verified matched the smell of burning stage paint used in that era. He described the feeling of not being able to breathe, of people pushing, of the heat being so intense it hurt to inhale, and he described dying. Not in graphic detail, his language was simple, childlike, but with an emotional weight that disturbed everyone who interviewed him. "It hurt," he said, "and I was scared, and I wanted my mom, but she wasn't there." Michael's mother confirmed that his memories began around age 4, appearing as nightmares initially. He would wake up screaming about fire, about being trapped, about people stepping on him. As he got older and developed more language skills, he began describing the context, the theater, the performance, the specific details of what happened. His parents took him to therapists, worried about trauma or psychological issues. But Michael wasn't traumatized by anything in his current life. He was traumatized by something that happened in 1903. The second case emerged in Oregon. A girl named Emma, born in 2011, began at age 5 describing what she called the bad day at the play. Her descriptions matched the Iroquois fire. The third case was in Florida, a boy named Connor who drew pictures of the burning theater and described trying to help a little girl who was crying, unable to get past the crowds to reach an exit. By 2018, researchers at the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, which had continued Dr. Stevenson's work after his death, had identified 9 children with consistent memories of the Iroquois theater fire. By 2020, that number had grown to 17, all born between January 2011 and June 2012, all spontaneously developing these memories between ages 4 and 6, all describing the same event with remarkable consistency. None of them had connections to Chicago, to theater history, or to families who had any relationship to the original disaster. The geographic distribution was random. Cases appeared in Virginia, Oregon, Florida, Texas, Pennsylvania, California, and Ontario, Canada. There was no pattern to suggest contamination or social transmission of the information. These children weren't learning about the fire and then claiming to remember it. They were remembering it first, and researchers were verifying their memories afterward. Dr. Jim Tucker, who took over past life research at UVA after Stevenson's retirement, was initially skeptical of the cluster. Individual past life cases can be compelling, he told researchers in a 2020 interview. But when you have multiple children remembering the same event, you have to consider alternative explanations. Collective false memory, cultural transmission through sources we haven't identified. Cryptomnesia, where children are exposed to information they don't consciously remember and then retrieve it as if it were personal memory. The challenge with the Iroquois cases is that we've been unable to identify any common source of exposure. These children aren't watching the same shows, reading the same books, or visiting the same websites. Their families don't overlap socially or geographically, and the details they're providing go beyond what you'd find in a quick internet search. They're describing personal, subjective experiences, the fear, the sensory details, the emotional context that suggest genuine memory rather than learned information. But Tucker also acknowledged a disturbing possibility that traditional reincarnation theory doesn't account for. If these children are genuinely accessing memories from the Iroquois fire, we have to ask, why this event? Why these children? And why now? Past life researchers typically work with cases where children remember dying and then being reborn relatively quickly, a few months to a few years between death and rebirth. The Iroquois fire occurred in 1903. These children were born over a century later. If they're reincarnated victims of the fire, they would have had to wait over 100 years to return. That doesn't fit the typical pattern, unless something about the Iroquois fire was different. Unless the trauma was so intense, the death so sudden and violent, that something prevented normal processes of death and rebirth from occurring. Unless those 600 souls were trapped somehow, held in a state of suspended existence, and are only now finding their way back. The memories the children describe share specific commonalities that researchers have documented. First, All of them remember being in the auditorium, not backstage. This suggests they were audience members, not performers or crew. Second, most remember being children in the original event as well. They describe being with parents or caregivers, being small, being unable to see over crowds. Third, they all describe the moment of death or near death, the point where memory ceases. Some remember burning, some remember not being able to breathe, some remember being crushed, but all remember the transition from consciousness to nothing. Fourth, and most disturbing, several children describe a period after death. Not heaven or an afterlife in the traditional sense. They describe darkness. Waiting, a sense of being lost or trapped, and voices. Other people, also lost, also waiting. We were together, one child told researchers, all of us who died. We were in the dark together, for a long time, and then we came back. This description of a collective post-death experience is unprecedented in reincarnation literature. Past life memories typically don't include extensive descriptions of the between-life period. When they do, it's usually described as peaceful, with spiritual guidance, choice about rebirth. What these children are describing sounds more like trauma-induced dissociation or imprisonment, as if the violence of the Iroquois fire didn't just kill 600 people, it trapped them, held them in some kind of psychic limbo where they remained aware of each other but unable to move forward. And then, beginning around 2011, something changed. Something allowed them, or forced them, to return. To be born again into bodies that would carry memories they were never supposed to retain. To live new lives haunted by deaths that occurred over a century ago. Researchers attempted to verify specific claims made by the children against historical records. In several cases, they found disturbing matches. Connor, the boy from Florida, described trying to help a little girl in a blue dress who was separated from her mother. Historical records from the Iroquois disaster include a survivor testimony from a woman who lost her 6-year-old daughter in the fire. The child was wearing a blue dress and became separated in the panic. Connor described the approximate location where this occurred, details of the surrounding area, and the emotional context that matched the mother's testimony. He couldn't have known this information from general historical accounts. It existed only in archived witness statements that hadn't been digitized or widely published. Emma, from Oregon, described a specific woman who helped her during the fire, providing details about the woman's appearance and voice. Researchers found a survivor account from a teacher who had been at the matinee with her students. Several of her students died in the fire. Emma's description matched the teacher's appearance based on historical photographs. The teacher's name was Miss Murphy, though Emma couldn't recall the name, just the face, the voice, and the feeling of being helped. Most compelling was the case of a boy named David, born in Texas in 2012. David described dying in the balcony section, specifically in the upper gallery where some of the worst casualties occurred. He described the view from that section, the stage below, the ornate ceiling, the configuration of the seating. He also described a specific detail, a broken seat that he'd been sitting in, where the velvet was torn and the wood frame was loose. Researchers, working with Chicago historians, located a photograph taken shortly before the fire showing the upper gallery. Enhancing the image digitally, they could identify individual seats. In the section David described, there was indeed a seat with visible damage to the upholstery and frame, exactly where David said he'd been sitting when the fire started. The probability of a child randomly guessing this detail is essentially zero. Either David had somehow accessed an obscure historical photograph that even researchers initially didn't know existed and had memorized details from it, which seems unlikely, or he was genuinely remembering sitting in that specific seat over a century ago. The psychological impact on these children has been significant. Most developed anxiety around fire, smoke, and enclosed spaces. Several require therapy for what presents clinically as PTSD, despite never experiencing trauma in their current lives. Parents report that the memories are intrusive, not something the children enjoy or want to discuss. Michael stopped talking about the fire altogether by age 9, telling his parents that remembering hurt too much. Emma developed selective mutism around the topic, able to draw pictures of her memories, but unable to verbally discuss them without severe distress. The memories appear to be genuine traumatic recall, complete with the psychological sequelae of trauma, hypervigilance, nightmares, avoidance behaviors, emotional dysregulation. These children aren't playing at remembering past lives. They're carrying genuine psychological wounds from experiences that, according to conventional understanding of reality, they never had. Dr. Tucker and his team attempted to bring some of the children together in 2021, hoping that meeting others with the same memories might provide validation and reduce isolation. The meeting was carefully controlled, with therapists present and parents' consent. 5 children participated: Michael, Emma, Connor, David, and a girl named Sophie from Pennsylvania. The researchers didn't tell the children why they were being brought together, wanting to see if they would recognize each other or spontaneously discuss shared memories. What happened was unexpected and deeply unsettling. The moment the children were in the same room, they became quiet. Then Michael said, "I know you." He was looking at Emma. She nodded. "From the fire," she said. Then David pointed at Sophie. "You were in the blue dress." Sophie, who had never publicly discussed what she was wearing in her memories, started crying. "You tried to help me," she said to Connor. Connor nodded. "I couldn't reach you. There were too many people." The children spent the next hour talking about the fire as if it had happened yesterday. They compared memories, filled in gaps for each other, described the same moments from different perspectives. They knew things about each other that they shouldn't have been able to know. Names they'd been called in that life, relationships they'd had, details of the moments before death. The researchers recorded everything. When they tried to bring the session to a close, the children resisted. "We don't want to forget each other again," Emma said. The researchers asked what she meant. "After the fire," she explained, "we were together in the dark. We promised we wouldn't forget each other, but then we did. When we came back, we forgot. And now we remember again," Sophie added. "But we're not all here. There were more of us, lots more. Where are the others?" That question haunts the investigation. If 17 children have been identified with memories of the Iroquois fire, and over 600 people died in that fire, where are the rest? Are there hundreds of other children walking around with suppressed memories they haven't articulated? Are there adults who experienced these memories as children but dismissed them or forgot them as they aged? Or is there something specific about these 17 children that made them capable of retaining and articulating the memories while others couldn't? The research team has attempted to publicize the phenomenon, hoping more cases will emerge, but they've also faced significant backlash. Skeptics argue that publicizing the cases will lead to false reports from attention-seeking families or will implant suggestions in vulnerable children. Religious groups have objected on theological grounds, arguing that past life research contradicts Christian doctrines about death and resurrection. And some mental health professionals worry that validating children's claims of past life memories could reinforce delusional thinking or interfere with proper psychological treatment. But the children don't seem delusional. They're articulate, intelligent, otherwise well-adjusted kids who happen to carry memories that shouldn't exist. And the memories are fading. By age 10, most of the children report that the memories are becoming less vivid, more like dreams than experiences. Michael, now 14, says he can still remember the fire when he tries, but it no longer feels immediate. "It's like watching a movie of something that happened to someone else," he explained in a recent interview. "I know it was me, but it doesn't feel like me anymore. It feels far away." This pattern matches typical past life cases. Memories peak between ages 4 and 8, then fade as the child's current life experiences accumulate and override the past life recall. By adolescence, most children have lost conscious access to the memories entirely, though emotional and behavioral traces often remain. The dark heart of the Iroquois case isn't just that children remember dying over a century ago. It's what they remember happening afterward. The darkness they describe. The sense of being trapped with the other victims, aware but unable to move on, suspended in a state between death and whatever comes next. If their memories are accurate, then the Iroquois theater fire didn't just kill 600 people. It trapped them for over 100 years. And the question becomes, why? What about that specific tragedy created conditions for this psychic imprisonment? Was it the sudden violence, the collective panic and terror, the fact that so many died together simultaneously in a confined space? Or was there something else, something about the building itself, the location, or the circumstances that created a kind of metaphysical trap that held those souls until they could finally escape? Some researchers have explored the possibility of place memory, the theory that locations can record traumatic events and play them back under certain conditions. The site of the Iroquois Theater, now occupied by an office building, has been investigated by paranormal researchers for decades. Reports of apparitions, unexplained sounds, feelings of panic and dread are common. Security guards and cleaning staff report avoiding certain areas, particularly the parts of the building that correspond to where the balcony sections of the theater once stood. Could the children be accessing place memories rather than personal past life memories? Could they be psychically sensitive individuals who somehow connected to the residual trauma imprinted on that location, even from hundreds or thousands of miles away? This theory would explain why multiple children remember the same event. They're all accessing the same psychic recording. But it doesn't explain the specificity of their memories, the consistent claim that they were personally present, or the details that suggest individual perspectives rather than a single collective impression. Dr. Emily Carlson, a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma, has proposed an alternative explanation that's both more conventional and more disturbing. She suggests that the children aren't remembering past lives at all, but are experiencing what she calls inherited trauma, epigenetic memories passed down through generations. We know that trauma can affect gene expression, and there's emerging evidence that traumatic experiences can be transmitted to offspring through epigenetic mechanisms. If any of these children are descendants of Iroquois fire survivors, even distant descendants who aren't aware of the family connection, they might be expressing inherited traumatic memories. This would explain why they remember the fire but not full past lives. They're not remembering being specific individuals. They're remembering the trauma their ancestors experienced. The problem with this theory is that researchers have investigated family histories extensively and found no connections between any of the children and known Iroquois fire victims or survivors. Genealogical records don't show any links. DNA analysis hasn't revealed common ancestry. If inherited trauma is the explanation, the mechanism of transmission would have to be far more complex than current science understands. There's another possibility that researchers discuss privately but rarely publish. What if consciousness isn't individual? What if, at some level, all human minds are connected to a collective unconscious, a shared repository of human experience and memory? Carl Jung proposed this concept in the early 20th century, suggesting that archetypal memories and experiences are inherited psychically rather than genetically. If the Iroquois fire created a particularly strong imprint in this collective unconscious, due to the intensity of the trauma, the number of deaths, the particular horror of the circumstances, then certain individuals, particularly children whose psychological boundaries are still forming, might access those memories. They wouldn't be remembering their own past lives or their ancestors' experiences. They'd be accessing a collective human memory of an event so traumatic that it transcended individual death and became part of the species' psychic heritage. This theory is almost impossible to test scientifically, but it would explain patterns that reincarnation and inherited trauma don't address. Why children with no connection to each other or to the historical event remember it, why they remember it as personal experience rather than abstract knowledge, and why the memories fade as they age and their individual identity strengthens. The climax of the investigation came in 2022, when researchers arranged for several of the children to visit Chicago and see the site where the Iroquois Theater once stood. 8 children participated, along with their families and research team members. The children were not told where they were going until they arrived at the location. When the group turned the corner and the building came into view, the children stopped. Michael said, "This is it." Emma started crying. David walked directly to a specific spot on the sidewalk and said, "This is where the alley was, where people jumped." The children were correct. They were standing at the location of the infamous death alley. The researchers showed the children historical photographs, overlaying them with the current street view to demonstrate where the theater's features had been. The children pointed out locations they remembered: the main entrance, the windows of the upper gallery, the stage door. Then something unexpected happened. Sophie, who had been quiet throughout the visit, walked to the wall of the current building, placed her hand against it, and said, "They're still here." The researchers asked what she meant. "The ones who died," Sophie explained. "Some of them are still here. They didn't all come back like we did. Some are still waiting." The other children nodded in agreement. "I can feel them," Michael said. "They're scared. They want to leave, but they don't know how." The research team had brought along Dr. Lloyd Auerbach, a parapsychologist with expertise in survival research and environmental phenomena. Auerbach had been skeptical of the past life interpretation of the case, but was interested in the children's claims about residual presence. He conducted electromagnetic field readings and found anomalies in specific locations the children identified: higher than normal EMF readings, temperature variations, and what he described as subjective impressions of unease that multiple team members experienced in the same areas. Auerbach couldn't confirm that spirits of Iroquois victims were still present, but he acknowledged that something unusual is occurring at this location, and the children's sensitivity to it is remarkable. The children asked if they could do something to help the others they sensed were still trapped. The research team, working with local spiritual practitioners and with the family's consent, arranged a small memorial service at the site. The children wrote messages to the Iroquois victims, acknowledging their suffering and offering release. "You don't have to stay here anymore," Emma wrote. "It's okay to go now. We remember you. We'll keep remembering you." The messages were read aloud at the site, flowers were placed, and a moment of silence was observed. The children reported afterward that the presence they'd felt had lightened, though not disappeared entirely. "Some of them left," Sophie said, "but some want to stay. They're waiting for something, or someone." Whether this ritual had any objective effect is impossible to verify, but the children seemed comforted by it, and their families reported that nightmares and anxiety decreased in the weeks following the Chicago visit. For the children, acknowledging what happened, honoring the dead, and attempting to offer help seemed to provide closure that years of therapy hadn't achieved. The truth about the children who remember the Iroquois theater fire remains elusive. Are they reincarnated victims of the disaster, carrying memories across a century of time? Are they psychically sensitive individuals accessing place memories or collective unconscious impressions? Are they experiencing some form of inherited trauma we don't yet understand? Or is something else occurring? Something that challenges our fundamental assumptions about consciousness, memory, and the nature of death itself? The evidence suggests that whatever these children are experiencing, it's genuine. Their memories are too detailed, too consistent, too verifiable to dismiss as fantasy or fabrication. The psychological impact is too real. The patterns are too specific. Something is happening that conventional psychology and neuroscience cannot fully explain. And that something suggests that the Iroquois theater fire, over a century after it occurred, is still claiming victims. Not by killing them, but by marking them, by imprinting its trauma so deeply into reality that children born 100 years later carry scars from wounds they never physically received. 17 children have been identified so far. But if Sophie is correct, if some of the original 600 victims have returned while others remain trapped, then there may be hundreds more. Children walking through the world carrying memories of that December afternoon in 1903, carrying the terror, the pain, the desperate final moments of people they believe they once were. Most will never articulate it. Most will suppress the memories, write them off as nightmares or imagination. But the memories will shape them. The trauma will influence their fears, their anxieties, their inexplicable reactions to theaters and crowds and fire. And somewhere in the back of their minds, in a place they can't quite access, they'll remember. They'll remember dying, and they'll remember the darkness that came after. The waiting, the sense of being lost with hundreds of others, all trapped together in the ruins of a building that was supposed to be safe, all waiting for release that took over a century to arrive. And for some, that release still hasn't come. The site of the Iroquois Theater still stands, buried under modern construction, forgotten by most of Chicago. The dead have been forgotten too, their names carved on a monument that few visit, their tragedy overshadowed by other disasters, other fires, other losses. But the children remember, and as long as they remember, the Iroquois fire isn't history, it's present, it's ongoing, it's a wound that hasn't healed, a trauma that hasn't resolved, a tragedy that refuses to end. The question facing researchers, families, and the children themselves is what comes next. As the children age, as their memories fade, will the trauma fade with it? Or will it pass to another generation, to children not yet born, who will one day wake up screaming about a fire they never experienced in a theater that no longer exists? Will this cycle continue until all 600 victims have returned, have lived new lives, have finally found peace? Or will some remain forever trapped, forever reliving that December afternoon, forever waiting in the darkness for a release that never comes? The investigation continues. New cases are still emerging, a child in Arizona, another in New York, each one describing the same fire, the same theater, the same death. The number grows slowly but steadily, and each new case is both confirmation and horror. Confirmation that something real is happening, but horror at the implication that hundreds of souls may still be caught in the aftermath of a disaster that killed them over a century ago. The children are growing up now. Michael is a teenager. Emma is in middle school. David talks about the fire less and less, but they all carry it with them. A past life that may or may not be their own. A death they remember dying. And a question that haunts them in quiet moments. If we came back, if we were given another chance at life after dying in that fire, why? Why us? Why now? And what happens when this life ends? Will we remember dying twice? Will we be trapped again? Or is this second life our only chance at escaping whatever held us for so long after the first death? There are no answers, only memories, only children who shouldn't remember but do. Only a fire that burned for 15 minutes in 1903 but somehow is still burning, still consuming, still claiming victims across the gulf of time. And somewhere in Chicago, in the foundation of an office building where a theater once stood, in the buried ruins of what was supposed to be a place of joy and entertainment, something waits, something remembers, something holds the echo of 600 deaths and won't let go. The children can feel it, and they know, even if they can't articulate it, that the Iroquois Theater fire isn't finished, that it won't be finished until every soul that died there has found peace, and that peace for some may be centuries away, or may never come at all. The recordings of the children's testimony sit in archived files at the University of Virginia. Researchers continue to analyze them, looking for patterns, for explanations, for some way to make sense of the impossible. Parents continue to support their children through the psychological aftermath of memories that shouldn't exist. And the children themselves continue to grow, to change, to slowly forget the fire that shaped the early years of their lives. But on December 30th each year, the anniversary of the disaster, several of the children report the same phenomenon. The memories become vivid again. The fear returns. The sense of being trapped, of smoke and heat and desperate crowds, overwhelms them. It passes within hours, but for those hours they're back in 1903, back in the theater, back in the moment of dying, and they're not alone. They can sense the others, the hundreds who died with them, the 17 who came back with them, and the countless more who are still there, still trapped, still waiting in the darkness, still hoping that someone will remember, that someone will help them find their way home, that someone will finally let them rest.